Well, a very good morning to you. Hi, everybody. My name is Kasim, and welcome back again to Journal Entries. I hope your week has been good. I hope you're well. I hope that life has been treating you well. So, as many of you will know, I like to do things differently. I like to change things up every now and then. This week, what I wanted to do is I wanted to go through some of the most influential people on my life and the people who really made quite an indelible impact. And I'd like to reflect on some of the things that they've said that I found really, really meaningful and that really connected with me and helped me alter my destiny. Many of you will know that I have gone through quite a crazy life, from homelessness to really struggling with my sexuality, being a bisexual man, to being an escort, to being homeless, to my biological father dying when I was at a very young age, to abandonment issues, to mental health issues, to multiple suicide attempts, to being in debt, to being addicted to alcohol, to having a porn addiction, to getting involved with the police. A lot of things have happened in my life. And then from all those things, I've then gone on to write multiple books, get myself a job, get qualified as a psychotherapist and counselor. At the moment, I'm currently doing research at university. I've been able to get myself out of debt. I've been able to go through therapy and turn my life around. I've gone and been able to speak to thousands of young people and trained loads of professionals as I've been working for the largest online digital mental health company in the UK. And a lot of people always say to me, Kasim, how did you turn it around? What was the key to turning your life around? And I always say to them, that I was one of the lucky people who found other people who had these psychological blueprints and the emotional blueprints that I never had and that I wasn't imbued as a young person. And basically, I started to script and build those psychological and emotional frameworks for myself as I got older and as I started to develop. Because you see, you must understand that every single person is unique. Every person has their own temperaments, their own personality, their own leanings, their own deficiencies, strengths, weaknesses. And as people, my observation has been that we have to find whatever works for us. We have to find that which is really specifically going to work for us. Now, there are some people who are born and they can go through the average life and they can go through the education system and the family system and the healthcare system, and they can kind of coast along and they can manage to get what they need through these various systems. But there are many people who have to tailor their life. They have to curate their life because their personality or their life circumstances haven't been defaults. They haven't fit the person and because of that the person is almost hindered and is not able to fulfill their highest fullest expression of themselves and isn't able to manifest in the world to their full capacity and full potential. And in order to do that, the person has to basically create different psychological emotional, spiritual templates, blueprints, and narratives that allow them to be able to unlock, basically feel safe so that they can unlock what is needed in order to go on to become successful, grow as a person, and realize their greatness. And so there are multiple people who helped me start to develop these psychological frameworks. One of them is a guy called Jim Rohn. Another is a guy called Tony Robbins. Another is a guy called Bishop T.D. Jakes. Another is a guy who passed away in a car crash called Dr. Miles Monroe. There is also a guy called Brendan Burchard. And um, the last two are Les Brown and a guy called Earl Nightingale. So these individuals helped me to basically formulate these psychological frameworks that really were tailored to me. Now, I didn't know that these were the people that I needed, but what ended up happening was that when I decided to turn my life around, I was looking for people who represented the kind of life that I wanted and also the way of thinking about the world and the way of living and showing up in the world that I could resonate with as Kasim. And it just happens to be that the first person who really resonated with me was Jim Rohn. I really resonated to Jim Rohn. I resonated with his message. I resonated with his simplicity. I understood what he was talking about. I could conceptualize it. It made sense to me. So, what I wanted to try to do over the next half an hour or so is go through some of these people's thoughts and sayings, because I've listened to a lot of these people. I've consumed a lot of their media and their resources. So I'd like to talk about some of the things that they've said and reflect on it and talk and give it my own thoughts. Now, you'll have to understand that there is no way I can get through all their content and every single one of these people. So I'm just going to start off with Jim Rohn since he was the most influential person in the beginning parts of my journey that helped me to turn my life around and helped me to redeem myself and helped me to position myself in such a way that I am where I am today. And then as if there's more, then I will go through more, but that's where I'm going to begin. So let's begin with a statement that Jim Rohn said. Jim Rohn said that you must take personal responsibility. You cannot change the circumstances, the seasons, or the wind, but you can change yourself. This is the single biggest statement that altered my destiny. It altered my life because you have to understand that prior to listening to Jim Rohn, I always felt that all the issues that I was experiencing in my life were the result of other people. My biological dad abandoning me. My stepdad was the issue because I felt like I didn't fit in my family. The issue was the bailiffs who kept coming to my house trying to get me to pay money, and they making claims like we're going to sell your laptop and your personal possessions. I blamed the weather. I blamed the fact that I was raised on a council estate. I blamed the fact that I was black. I blamed racism. Um, I blamed the education system. I blamed television. I blamed rappers and the lack of representation of positive black males. I had spent my whole life blaming people on the outside for the issues that I was experiencing. And when I heard Jim Rohn say that you have to take personal responsibility, I then had to, not then, but down the road, what I began to learn is that for me as Kasim, what I had to learn was what's called radical accountability. Radical accountability is where you basically take full responsibility for whatever has happened to you and wherever you are and where you want to go. And you say, look, there are good and bad people in the world. There are people who are going to disappoint me. There are people who are going to be positive. There are people who are going to be negative. There are going to be people who are going to betray me, but there are going to be people who are going to be loyal, who are going to be trustworthy. There are going to be people who are going to support me, and there are going to be people who are going to be crabs in a barrel. They're going to try to hinder me. They're going to try to suck the life out of me. There's going to be criticism. You cannot reach the highest, fullest expression of who you're capable of becoming without somebody saying, who do you think you are? Without somebody saying, well, there are people who've done it better. And I always think about people like Beyonce, and you think about people like Kelly Rowland and Nelly, and you think about people like Drake. And you think, my God, they can't. Look how big these people are. They can't be another artist who's going to come up with something, but then another artist come along and they're doing the same template, technically speaking, in terms of their producing music. They're using their voice, their creativity in order to produce music which can influence other people. And the reality is that time and time and time again, people do produce music that is unique. They do produce tracks that are viral, that connect with people, that people resonate with, even though there are thousands of people. And so, what I began to realize after realizing all of this is that me as Kasim, I am going to have to start really looking at my life and looking at what do I need, what are the circumstances of my life, what am I lacking, what do I need to imbue onto myself, what skills, what knowledge, what team do I need to build in order to get to where I want to get to? And more importantly, where do I even want to get to? And beyond even thinking about where I want to get to, let's have a look at where have I been? What is my story? What is my history? How was the way that I've been brought up, how has it impacted who I am as Kasim today? Because if I'm cynical and if I'm unforgiving and I haven't let go of the past, or I don't know what mistakes or patterns or dynamics that I've played out in the past, what's going to end up happening is I'm just simply going to repeat them in the next 10, 15, 20 years. So I need to look at where have I been and then learn from it and take stock of it and look at, okay, what things, there's this saying, eat the chicken, eat the meat, throw out the bones. What I was trying to figure out is what is the meat? What has been the nutritional aspect of my past that I can extract from it so that when I go into the future, I'm going to take the nutritional parts uh, and structure them and align them into my life and put habits and systems into my life so that I can continue to utilize them. And what are the things that are not healthy and the things that are not going to improve my health, my mindset, my relational dynamics, my ability to make contact or connection with other people? What is hindering that? What is not good? What is unhygienic in those? And let me let go of those. And a huge amount of that's meant that I had to stop looking at other people and I had to start looking at myself. I had to take a real good inventory of me as Kasim. Kasim, what do you believe? What do you want? It sounds so simple to actually ask these questions of what do you believe and what do you want? But I've got to tell you, a lot of people, the things that they believe, and this is what I notice about myself as Cass, the things that I was believing isn't what I was believing. The things that I was believing were I was basically regurgitating and repeating what I had heard, but it wasn't things that reconnected with me as Kasim as a person. And I was like, yeah, that really sits well with who I am as a person. I genuinely believe that. That was not my experience, unfortunately. And so I really had to take a really good look at myself and ask Kasim, there were five questions that I really had to look at. And those actually I took from Dr. Miles Monroe. Those questions were number one, who am I? Like, who are you, Kasim? Not because of your name, as in we know that your name is Kasim, but if we remove Kasim and we remove your status and your title and we remove your cars and all those things, what's left? Who is Kasim? Not the Kasim as in you're trying to become a lawyer, not the Kasim because you're trying to become a uh, a good son. What is the core of you as a person? The second question is where have you been? What's your story? What is actually my story as Kasim? Like Cass, you need to tell us what is your story? Where have you been? The third question is what is your potential? What is your capacity? What are you actually good at, Cass? Like you've talked about what you want to do, but instead of focusing on success and achievement, what about you just look at what you're competent at? Because what I began to realize about myself was I was not competent really at anything. I wasn't a 7 or 8 or 9 out of 10 at pretty much anything apart from bullshitting and lying. And that wasn't going to help me to fulfill my potential. So I had to really look at what Kasim are you good at? And if you're not good at anything, what can you get good at? Or what would you like to get good at? The other one is, where am I going? Where is it that I'm going with my life? It sounds very simple. It sounds very, 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 very simple. Where is it? But that question of where am I going? What is my future? What is my destiny going? What do I want? It's not an easy question because when you ask people today, what do you want? A lot of people can't tell you what they want because they don't know. They're simply repeating the patterns and the behaviors and the dynamics and the blueprints that they were handed as children, and they're just basically recycling and regurgitating the same things over and over and over again with different people. And so what I wanted to do is that I wanted to change that. I wanted to actually get better. In fact, journal entries, as many of you will know, um, is stems from that very belief. You see, I believe and came to the conclusion that Not everybody's going to become rich. Not everybody's going to become famous. Not everybody's going to be a multimillionaire. Not everybody comes from a family where they have massive resources behind them, where their parents or their family members have high positions of status and power and influence, and consequently they can help them. I realize that not every single person is going to accrue massive wealth. That's just not the reality of most people. There are, of course, a large minority of people who that is their truth, but for the vast majority of people, that is not their reality. But what I recognized was every single person can take principles and lessons and learn about the fundamentals. Every single person is good at something. Every single person has observed things that work and don't work. They have learned life lessons. They've learned these keys and insights from their life. And what I learned is that the person can take those and they can then use them in such a way that it can improve not only their life, but other people's lives. In other words, if they will learn to recalibrate and take stock or accountability of their life, what ends up happening is that they can get better, they can improve, they can change themselves. And as they change themselves and they refine themselves and they tweak themselves and the way that they think and their mindset and their philosophy and their attitude, then what ends up happening is everything else on the outside starts to manifest and change accordingly to their belief system and the way that they think about themselves. And nobody told me that. Nobody had ever told me that before, and I had to learn that by myself. And when I learned that from listening to Jim Rohn, it began to really change my life, really in a massive way. In fact, it was Jim Rohn who said that you cannot change destination overnight, but you can change direction. And that was massive for me. Because what Jim Rohn was saying is that you can literally, other people can't change your direction for you. They can influence you, but you as a person can literally say, that's where I want to go. And you can decide that now. Nobody can force you. Of course, you're not going to be able to get there instantly, but you can make that decision. And it begins internally by making that decision for you. Because if you look at a lot of people, which has been my observation both in therapy and just as Cassim observing people, is that a lot of people are not really doing and are not going towards what they want. They're going towards what other people want them to go towards. They're living their life within the context of the opinions that other people have of them, low expectations. Many people doubt themselves because whenever they think about something that they want to do or they want to achieve in their life, they have a little voice inside of them that stops them from doing it because they think they're not going to be good enough. If they try to do something that is out of their group, then they will be isolated and kicked out and they won't be included. And so, one of the things that I've learned in my life is that all true visions will be tested for authenticity. If a person truly says that they want something, all hell is going to break loose. And if you decide that you want to truly be yourself and you want to achieve what you want to do, be prepared for enemies. Be prepared for somebody to hate you. Be prepared for somebody to say, how are you going to do that? Where's the money? How long is it going to take? Well, that's going to take years. And the people who end up living the most fulfilled lives, based on my observation, are people who are on their own path. They're on their own destiny. Their life almost doesn't even make sense because they're not looking at the steps one, two, and three. What they're looking at is the larger vision. And in order to get to the larger vision, they may have to make sacrifices or they may have to make decisions that do not align with the natural path, but it does align with their path. They may have to go off track so that they can begin, they can tailor the path to them. But ultimately, they're still going to end up in the destination that they want. And nobody had ever told me that. So that's the first thing. It's quite a lot, isn't it? Responsibility is a massive, massive, massive thing. When I learned that it's not what people say to you or what people do to you, it's about what you make of it. That was massive for me. You know that thing where people say, they made me cry, they made me upset, they made me angry. Nobody can make anyone angry. Nobody can make anyone upset. People can say stuff to you, and we can interpret what they said to us as impactful or as criticism or as shaming. But what words in themselves really have no bearing on the meaning that we assign to things. And you have to understand that meaning is far much more important than the thing that has happened to you. I remember I was on a training course which was talking about trauma, and I was really curious about how it is that women who are raped seem to say more about it. They seem to share. And when I talk about, and I hear men talk about rape, so for example, a 14-year-old boy having sex with a 26-year-old woman, that is by definition rape. Well, actually, it's not rape. It's actually sexual assault because rape, in legal terms, can only be done by penetration. So you can't rape somebody unless you use a penis. So in legal terms, it's called sexual assault. And I wanted to understand why it is that boys and men don't see, they seem to see that as an accolade. They seem to see it as they've won. They don't see it as a negative. And what I began to realize is that it's the meaning. Trauma isn't what happens to you. Trauma is the meaning that the person assigns to what happened to them. There are many, 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 many people who've lost family members, who've gone through sexual, physical, verbal, spiritual, and financial abuse, and they come out stronger. They're not affected. Now, part of it is that some people naturally have a certain personality type where they just have simply more resilience. They're able to bounce back. Resilience is the ability to go back to your natural status, to go back to zero, to go back to your equilibrium, right? It's how quickly you can go back. People who lack resilience, when something happens, they go through crisis, trauma, the unexpected throws them off. When those happen and they're not, and those people don't have a lot of resilience, what ends up happening is they get thrown for a long time. It takes them much longer to be able to go back to their homostatus, to their normal, to feel safe again. Whereas there's some people who are able to do that very, very quickly. So that's part of it. But the other part is that some people have learned how to basically get back to that. So you can see this is quite a big, big thing. How long have I just I've just spent 15, 20 minutes just talking about that one thing. So you can see why it was so monumental for me as a person. That one statement alone, look at how much it's taken for me to speak about it. So taking responsibility was monumental for me because it really, really began a lot of the changes that ended up going on and happening in my life. It was the foundation. It really was. I have these I'm due to write a book about what I call the five spheres of life, the five things that I've realized people basically struggle with. And if you master these five areas, your life becomes much, much more easier. They are seasons and cycles. So some people do the right thing at the wrong time. I won't get into it, but that's the first one. Seasons and cycles, fundamentals and basics. So laws and principles. So laws and principles are things that are consistent. They never change. Now I've lost my chain of thought. So seasons and cycles, fundamentals and basics. Um, Hold on a minute. Let me just get this because now I've completely thrown myself off because whilst I've been trying to remember those. So the five spheres, that's it. So let me go through these. Um, So the first one is roles. So people believe that I have to be this way. I have to be a man. This is what it means to be a man. A man is not this. A boy is not this. So roles. A woman's job is this. Roles. People get stuck in roles. The second is basics and fundamentals. The third is seasons and cycles. The fourth is laws and what do you call it? Laws and principles, and the fifth one is rules. People, rules can change and they change all the time and they change at each level that you go at. And some people are just not good at that. So what I began to realize is that some people haven't mastered those five spheres. Some people don't realize that there are some things you cannot change. Some people don't realize that there are, most of us are going to live under 110 years. I don't know when how old the oldest person who's ever lived. In fact, let me search it up. But if you know, um, hold on a minute. If you know that as human beings, um, as a species, we have not been able to live beyond. Let me have a look here because I'm searching it up on ChatGPT. So the oldest person that has been documented, which was in 1875, was 122 years of age, which was Janine Clement. Okay, who was born in February of 1875 and died on the 4th of August 1997. So, if you know that a human being, we seem to, on average, have about, well, the maximum person who's lived has lived to 122 years. So if you want to use that as a marker, because if I say the average person lives to 80, people then say, well, some people live to 100. So I'm going to use the extreme side of things and say, let's say you know that you're going to live for 122 years. That means, or let's say more. Because, if I say that, people then say, well, Kasim, I'm going to break. So, and this is what I'm trying to say. This is one of the spheres. One of the spheres is understanding seasons and cycles and principles. Because one of the observations that I began to realize is that one of the issues that I was experiencing and I was really struggling with as Kasim is that I always wanted to be the exception. The problem is not everybody can be the exception. The exception is the exception for a reason. The exception means that that's not the normal. And what I began to really focus on, which is why I started to focus on those five spheres, is I really started to pay a lot of attention to the what was normal, what was the standard, because the standard was predictable. Society was built up on the standard. And in whilst I'd mastered the basics and the fundamentals of being the standard, then I can level it up. Then I can take it to the next level. But what I began to realize was that what I was doing, particularly when I was a young child and growing up and I was a young boy, is that I was trying to break the rules. I was always trying to go from one to seven, when in reality, it is actually easier and is more effective if I go through one, two, three, four, five, and then six and seven. But every time I would try to go from zero to 1,000, something went wrong, mainly because I hadn't built the foundations, which is one of the spheres, right? Basics and foundation and basics and fundamentals. So yes, I hope that you're seeing where I'm going with this, but that was one of the things. What else? Here's another quote. If you don't design your own life plan, chances are you'll end up falling into someone else's plan. And guess what they have for you? Not very much, my God. So this was one of the things that also really changed my destiny and changed my life a lot. Because what I began to think about and realized is, and I've talked a little bit about it already, is man, I'm not really living the life that I want. I'm really living the life that other people want me to live. What I began to realize is me not fulfilling my potential and my destiny and me not living my life how I want it and how I would like it is actually benefiting other people. And I didn't know that. I didn't know that if I decided not to fulfill my potential or subconscious, or I did not make a deliberate decision to go after that which I believe I can achieve, I can be, I can manifest, I can produce, nobody like that, nothing changes. In other words, I began to realize, and this was one of the massive things that I really had to learn about myself, is I'm unique. Now, that's me going into what is called the ego, right? That's me now talking, being self-centered a little bit and going into narcissism. But I began to realize that actually to survive and to reach your potential and to unlock your greatness, a certain level of narcissism, of self-interest has to be activated in within us. And I began to realize that there is a lot of us going through life and we don't want to seem selfish. We don't want to seem self-centered. We don't want to go into the ego. But the reality is that in order for us to fulfill our potential, if that is something which we want to do, and for us to help the people who we want to help, if that is something we want to do, we may have to stray from the natural path. We may have to disappoint someone. We may have to let people down. I discovered that I was what I thought was gay, but actually ended up being bisexual when I was 22 years of age. I was brought up in an Islamic family. My family are Muslims. In Islam, you cannot be gay. You cannot be bisexual. I had a problem on my hands now because I could either lie, which I tried to lie, and it led me to trying to kill myself because of all the mental health issues that started occurring. And it led me to drinking a lot, and it led me to self-destruction because lying for me as Kasim, I just don't like it. It doesn't fit with me. I can't lie. I just don't like it because the blueprint that I was given by my parents were to be good people because my parents are good people to the most part. No one is perfect. And so I found it really difficult to lie. Um, and I had to make a decision because the problem for me was I didn't want to be bisexual. This was not what I wanted. You know, there are some people who end up discovering their sexuality and it's part of their identity and they love it and they are can be. That was not what I wanted. I didn't want it. I wanted to have the nuclear family. I wanted to get married. I wanted to have a child. I wanted to have the I wanted to have the picket fence. That was what I'd wanted my life. So now to go on and start wanting to date men or women or to go on and do all of these things, that was not what I wanted for myself. It's not what I wanted to make my parents proud and happy of me. That was not it. This was a disappointment, but I began to realize that if I don't live within my truth, that if I don't live my most authentic life, it is not only going to be a disservice to my parents, but it's also going to be a disservice to me. One of the things that I believe every human being should do in their lifetime is to allow their parents to see them at their peak, to see them in their truth, to see them. I believe that one of the highest things that a parent wants in their life is to know that their child is going to be okay, is to know that their child is going to figure it out, to know that their child they raise a child who is their own man. I believe that is one of the highest gifts that anyone can offer their parents. The problem is, you can't give that to your parents unless your parents know that you're going to be okay. And you can't give the parents don't know that you're going to be okay until you start to step into your greatness and you start to live a life that is truly yours and which you want to be living and that represents your values and that represents your potential, your destiny. It represents what the core, your essence of who you are as a person. That cannot be activated or utilized in your life, any of those, and you can't give that gift to your parents until you step into that. And so, for me as Kasim, I had to make a decision. Now, many people will say, well, Kasim, you don't know my parents. I can't do what they want. The fact that you're saying that in itself represents the fact that there is a choice. You just don't want to realize it. You just don't want to accept the choice. You don't want to go down that path because of the shame, the guilt that might come up for me, might come up for you. What I realized was in order for me to truly live, I had to experience the negative emotions of life. Because what was happening was that in trying to make everybody happy, and trying to live this perfect picture life. What ended up happening was I wasn't really experiencing all of life. I was only experiencing the positive emotions. They weren't even positive, they were the neutral emotions of life. And what I began to realize is that to truly live, you have to experience a whole spectrum: shame, guilt, self-loathing, joy, anticipation, excitement, connection, neglect, frustration, unworthiness, uncertainty, certainty, variety. All of these different emotional states that a person can live in will vary based on the kind of life that you're trying to live. Because there is so many people who come into therapy, and when I speak to them about how they feel, they can't tell you. They can't tell you because they've had to disassociate or numb themselves because they don't either want to disappoint anybody, they don't want to disappoint themselves, and they don't want to feel or stroll through or filter through and go through the different range of emotions that human beings can exist and experience, that exist and that human beings can experience. They don't want to. And that is their choice, actually. They don't have to. But what I'm saying is that to truly live, one has to do that. One has to design their internal blueprint. They have to design their mindset. They have to design their outward ways of being, how they're going to relate to people, where they live. You know, a lot of people only live where they live because that's where they were born and raised. It's all they know. There are people who don't have passports. I say to people sometimes, particularly when people are asking me about like success and stuff like that, and trying to find what they want to do, I say to them, it could be that the reason why you are not successful and the reason why you can't find your group or your people is because you're in the wrong place. If you're trying to become a musician or you're trying to make it really successful in somebody in the media, and you live in a village in the rural, most rural parts of Scotland where you have to drive 100 miles to see somebody, you have a serious issue in your hands. And then on top of it, you're not on social media, you have a serious issue in your hands. If you are somebody who's gay, lesbian, queer, or you're somebody who wants to who's comes from a very strong faith position, you're religious, you're Muslim, and you want to go and find somebody who's their fundamental life is driven by their faith position, and you live in a city with young people who are vibrant, they're competitive, it's all about money, you're in the wrong place. And you don't go to church, and you don't go to the mosque, and you don't go to prayers on a Friday, and you don't go to the Sikh temple, you have a serious issue on your hands because what you're saying and what you want do not align. There isn't an integration. Um, and so, do you see where I'm going with this? Do you see how deep this stuff is? My God, we're only on point two, and I'd written all these things. So, what I might actually do next week is I might continue this as a series and continue to go through all of these because this stuff is so deep. And the thing is, I'm saying this stuff to you because nobody told it to me. Nobody told me this stuff, which is part of the reason why I'm sharing it with you. So I'm going to stop there because we've come up to sort of 30, we're going way over 30 minutes actually. And I don't know what your thoughts are. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Like, I like to hear what people think. I like to hear your perspective. So please comment and like, subscribe and all of that fancy stuff. You know how all this stuff works, guys. You know the algorithm and the online platforms like people who share, like, comment, all of this sort of stuff. And if you want to support me, that's one of the best ways to do it. But apart from that, I think I'll stop there. And I will see you next week where I will share more of this. Um, and hopefully it will be of some value. Have a good week and keep smiling and keep happy and continue to be your highest, fullest expression. Bye for now.